Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 2026 International Symposium. My name is Kathleen Fairfax. I'm the Vice Provost for International Affairs here at Colorado State University. This session is a bold invitation, the Peace Corps at 65. It's presented by the Honorable Carol Spahn, 21st Director of the U.S. Peace Corps, as well as Presidential Executive in Residence here at CSU. Before I fully introduce Carol and turn it over to her, I just wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping items with you for the attendees. Attendees, you can enable closed captioning using the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Also, we don't have the chat enabled during this webinar, but we have the Q&A enabled. So when you have questions, submit them via the Q&A button. And we will make sure that they find their way, if there's time, to Carol. I also will encourage you, you'll be prompted at the end of the webinar today to give some feedback. So I would encourage you to follow that quick pop-up and give us some feedback on the session. I would appreciate that. And finally, one other note is that we are making a recording of all of the sessions of the International Symposium, and they will be available on the International Program's website in a couple of weeks, so you can look for them there. So let me introduce our distinguished speaker today, Carol Spahn. Carol is a distinguished public servant and global leader with over 30 years experience across government, nonprofit, and private sectors. Carol was the 21st Director of the Peace Corps. In that role, she guided the agency through a historic relaunch after the pandemic, returning volunteers to service in over 60 countries. Now, serving as Presidential Executive in Residence at CSU, Carol continues to inspire future changemakers by championing human connection and everyday acts of service, values that do really reflect CSU's legacies as one of the nation's top Peace Corps volunteer producing institutions. So with that, thank you all for attending today, and I will turn it over to Carol.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathleen. And thank you to Colorado State University for conveniently convening this symposium during Peace Corps Week, which takes place every year to celebrate John F. Kennedy's signing of an executive order in 1961 to establish a new initiative within the State Department to promote world peace and friendship. It is really deeply meaningful to be here today and to be a part of this amazing university where Maury Albertson, who is then a professor at CSU, led a team to develop the original feasibility study for the Peace Corps. Now, I knew this and I have glanced at the study, but as I prepared for this talk, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole into that original study. And I can say that they picked the right team to do this work. The thought and care with which the founding principles were established, the clarity of intent, and the positioning of the agency within the context of foreign policy and foreign assistance is truly remarkable. And here is a fun fact. Did you know that the study, which is more than 300 pages long, was originally bid at $20,000, funded by Congress at $10,000, and ultimately required philanthropic support and in-kind contributions from CSU faculty and staff to conduct surveys and outreach in 11 countries. It was a scrappy beginning at what was truly a crucial moment in our nation's history as President Kennedy launched what was then a new era in U.S. foreign assistance against the backdrop of the Cold War. And I want to share a quote from the proposal, which really struck me. It says, "Congressmen and educators visiting these underdeveloped countries have been impressed by the fact that a few Americans working side by side with people of these countries, digging wells, establishing schools, repairing machinery, were leaving a more favorable impression of our democratic ideals than were the quantities of guns and tanks and bridges we were bringing into the country." A few Americans working side by side with people of these countries were leaving a more favorable impression of our democratic ideals. These foundational principles of the Peace Corps, as laid out in the study, are still present today. From aligning with host country interests to learning a language to living at the level of the people. Volunteers are there to serve, it says, teaching by example and learning through direct contact. We all owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to CSU and to the diligent team that brought this agency to life. Thank you. This week, we celebrate the Peace Corps' 65th birthday. This year, we celebrate Colorado's 150th and America's 250th. Anniversaries invite celebration, but they also invite reflection. And this is a moment that calls for both. When the Peace Corps was founded, then Secretary of State Dean Rusk wrote, "The Peace Corps is not an instrument of foreign policy, because to make it so would rob it of its contributions to foreign policy. Rather, the Peace Corps is an opportunity for the nations of the world to learn what America is all about. If they do so, they shall be surprised to discover how many allies America has all over the world." These principles, nonpartisan, independent, people-to-people engagement, has guided the agency through extraordinary times. And this is one of those times. When I stepped in the role of acting director in 2021, following our first ever global evacuation due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we faced existential questions about our future. Would Congress take the opportunity with no volunteers in the field to shutter the agency? Were we still relevant? Did countries want the Peace Corps? Or was it just a remnant of American exceptionalism and saviorism? It is critical that we ask those questions again and again, and that we continuously challenge ourselves and our assumptions and adapt. I am very proud to say that 4 years later, with broad bipartisan support, we were back in 61 countries with more than 3,000 volunteers. And as a key step in our reentry process, we required that every country submit a letter from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs inviting us back. We didn't want to go back where we were no longer wanted. Every single country asked us to come back, which is a powerful statement. And we fought hard to get back. In fact, many countries wanted more volunteers as they recovered from COVID-19, and others invited us back to reopen programs. When I sat with the president of Benin, he asked me for 500 of our generalists to teach in their schools. They had a severe teacher shortage and were working hard to fill the gap. He told me how much he valued Peace Corps volunteers' energy and enthusiasm, which was infectious. Mongolia asked for 1,000 volunteers. Uzbekistan invited us back and said they would take 10,000, one for every school. In 2023, Vietnam welcomed its first ever cohort, and Sri Lanka reopened after a hiatus of more than 40 years due to civil war. There was no shortage of demand for the Peace Corps' presence in the communities around the world, and our volunteers were welcomed with open arms. We gather today at a consequential moment for U.S. engagement in the world. As we mark 65 years of the Peace Corps, we do so amid significant restructuring in America's development architecture. Not once during that time of rebuilding did I imagine that just a few short years later, we would witness the rapid dismantling of USAID, a shifting national conversation about the role of development in U.S. foreign policy, an intensified focus on hard power, war with Iran. My heart goes out to all who have been impacted. And my gratitude goes out to all who have dedicated themselves to fighting for peace, human dignity, and the eradication of poverty around the world. It goes without saying that these moves will have impacts that extend well beyond the current administration and beyond the immediate and profound loss of life due to cuts in aid and war in the Middle East. They speak to who we are as a nation and who we want to be. When the Peace Corps and USAID were founded in 1961, approximately 70% of Americans supported its establishment. Around that time, approximately 60% supported U.S. foreign aid in principle. Today, you may be surprised to know that 70 to 80% of Americans, Republicans and Democrats, support humanitarian-oriented foreign aid, such as medicine, medical supplies, food, and clothing. A majority support economic development and democracy promotion. So why do we find ourselves in this moment? There is a major perception gap. On average, American adults think we spend a quarter of our federal budget on foreign assistance. The actual number is around 1%. According to a Kaiser Family Foundation 2025 survey, 47% of Americans say that it is at least somewhat likely that getting rid of USAID could significantly reduce the US budget deficit. We know that that is not true. The values of the American people, who we say we are and who we want to be, is at odds with what we perceive. This tells me that the fight is far from over. How we engage now does not dictate who we will become and how we will engage in the future. Trust has been lost due to the way we withdrew. It will take time to build back, but it is not over. Against this backdrop, the Peace Corps has set an ambitious goal of growing to 8,000 volunteers and is launching a new Tech Corps initiative to promote AI adoption in partnership with the private sector. This will not be easy. The Peace Corps' budget was $400 million in 2010. Today, it stands at $410.5 million, down from $430 million last year. This is a roughly 30% reduction in real purchasing power over 16 years. Like many agencies, we have faced staffing pressures. So as a community, we need to continue to push for more funding. In the meantime, the Peace Corps remains scrappy as ever. I was with the agency for 13 years as a volunteer in Romania, a country director in Malawi, chief of operations for the Africa region during the global evacuation, and then 4 years serving as director. I have seen this agency meet the moment in ways that history remembers. From the smallpox warriors who went door to door in rural Ethiopia and Afghanistan to find the last remaining cases, to those who've served in South Africa following the end of apartheid. The network of host communities, students, families, staff, and volunteers, people who have welcomed us in and worked with us side by side for decades, are some of the most passionate, committed people I have ever met. People who will put it all on the line for their ideals. Today, volunteers may be the most visible representatives of the United States in communities around the world. The human face of America abroad. And people-to-people diplomacy matters more than ever. So given this rapidly shifting landscape, I must admit that I struggled with a title for this talk. A bold invitation was the theme of our post-COVID marketing campaign. It asked, are you looking for more in this world? To be a part of something bigger? The Peace Corps is a bold, positive, exciting network of human beers and human doers around the world who are willing to do more, give more, and reach out to go beyond the expected and the everyday to serve a greater purpose. When we launched the campaign, most of us who had served in the Peace Corps wanted to go back to the original slogan, which was the toughest job you'll ever love. But coming out of the pandemic, our research led us in a different direction. This week, I was thrilled to see that the Peace Corps brought back that slogan. with the line, still the toughest job you'll ever love. So, what is today's bold invitation? It is an invitation to Americans to reach out across difference, both here at home and abroad, to serve with humility and curiosity, to invest in human connection. It is a call to action to tell the story of foreign assistance, and an invitation to our nation to see international engagement not only as policy, but as relationship, trust, and shared humanity. So it is my hope that we double down on the Peace Corps, that we continue to build on the audacious goals that were set out in 1961 by a group of pragmatic dreamers. And I hope that you will join us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carol. That was truly inspiring words, and I really appreciate it. We've gotten some questions, and I think it would be really helpful to expand on a couple of the points that you made.
Sure.
First of all, you talked just very briefly about what your own history with the Peace Corps has been, spanning 13 years. What led you to join the Peace Corps initially? What was that experience like?
Well, that is always an interesting question for me to answer. Kathleen, I started my career as a financial statement auditor with KPMG Peat Marwick. So I am an accountant by training and went out post graduation, saw a little bit of the world, and then we were, living during the Cold War. And, as the wall fell, as communism was breaking down, and as the Peace Corps was opening up in those post-communist countries, it really was one of those moments when you were just called to be a part of something. And that is why I joined. I served in post-communist Romania as a small business development volunteer, and it changed my life.
It's amazing. So now, thinking of today, when Peace Corps is marking this year 65 years, and you've seen it across its lifespan, what do you think is the most significant evolution from its founding vision to its role in today's kind of geopolitical development landscape?
Well, let me talk first about what's the same, which I think is the more interesting thing, because when Peace Corps was founded, it really was during this time of tremendous geopolitical tension. It was a time of transition. It was a time when we were looking at how we wanted to lead in the world. And it was really a manifestation of those values of who we are as a country and how we want to show up. And I think it's really exciting and really heartwarming, again, to go back to those foundational principles and to say that those are the same. And those are embedded in every person you'll meet who has ever served in the Peace Corps. And I think that's what's critical that we hang on to today in the midst of all of the noise that is around us. How do we point positive? How do we look at what our positive contribution can be in this moment and how we show up as individuals, as Americans, and in particularly across difference and across borders? So I think that's what's truly the most important thing is what has stayed the same in the context of all of these changes.
Right.
There have been many different innovations in terms of how we approach our work, the clarity of the training, and how we achieve the development outcomes. Clearly, it's very different now, even than when I was a volunteer. And I say this sometimes, in quiet terms because it makes me feel really old. But I served before the internet, or just as the internet was starting to. We got email when I was a volunteer. That was very exciting to not have to send things by mail, and that has certainly changed the nature of service. It's also changed the nature of how we stay connected to one another decades following service. I had my counterpart reach out to me about 5 years ago, and we reconnected, shared what had happened after I left and where he was. And when you look at that at a large scale, what we saw in Ukraine, for example, which is one of our largest countries in terms of the numbers of volunteers who are serving, when war broke out there, Return Peace Corps volunteers were some of the first who were standing up a Facebook page, helping, checking in on people, their students, their host families, helping them find shelter and places to stay in neighboring countries, raising money, sending supplies. You then have this grassroots network of people who care about each other and stay connected during that time. And it really was quite a beautiful manifestation of what that possibility is now.
Hmm. Yes, wonderful. It's true. The examples that are continuously set and reset by our volunteers abroad in terms of, like you said, they represent the best of America. It's you can't underestimate the power of that. Another question was that someone posted was last year we saw lots of changes to international agencies in DC, such as USAID, which you mentioned, but not the Peace Corps, not in the same way. It wasn't impacted in the same way. And it might even be growing through the new tech corps that you mentioned. So does that signal there is broad support for the Peace Corps on both sides of the aisle in the US?
I think that the Peace Corps has maintained broad bipartisan support since inception and has really fought to keep an apolitical stance on what we do as people to people engagement. And I do think that was important as we navigated some of these shifts.
So another question, maybe a little deeper into that, is when you look back at the 65-year history of the Peace Corps, do you think there was a golden era or a couple of high point periods? And also what's your fondest hope for what it will look like in 10 years?
Wow, that's a really big question. So I think that the excitement surrounding the launch of the Peace Corps was really just a proud moment. Students on the steps in Michigan, showing up at 2 a.m. for that call to action, then mobilizing petitions, tens of thousands of applications, this really rapid scale up, and the energy and enthusiasm of that moment is really striking. And many people who I meet even today, that's what they go back to, is that moment of inspiration. And so as I look at, what is my hope for the agency, I hope we find that moment again, that we dig deep into the character of who we are and really show up in throngs to join the Peace Corps.
Hmm.
And, some part of me expected that following COVID-19, when we were all stuck behind screens, we couldn't travel, our worlds got very, very narrow. And, it was my hope that as we threw open the doors, that there would be those throngs waiting. It didn't happen in the way that I had hoped. And, we built back very intentionally, we built back gradually. And I do hope that we have that moment where we can really inspire the next generation to serve.
Thank you. Stepping back a little bit bigger picture, from the point of view of the many students that we have here in the audience, some curiosity about what's your own career journey and what has it been and how did it lead you to become director of the Peace Corps? And are there recommendations you can share for students who are interested in becoming leaders, either in government or nonprofit or development type work?
Mhm. Well, let me just say that life does not happen in a straight line.
Mhm.
We think it does. We work, we prepare, and you have to do that, and you have to have a vision for where you want to go. And then when life throws you a curveball, be it positive or negative, be ready for that. So I think many of the different steps that I took throughout my career that led me to be in the position of director were really about saying yes to things that maybe I felt like I wasn't quite ready for. And, the opportunity came. I said yes. I asked for help. I acknowledged the places where I really had, areas to grow in. And that enabled me to move into a variety of roles that I maybe wouldn't have otherwise thought of for myself. And one of them, just to give you an example, I was director of finance for a small global health foundation with a lot of experts in infectious diseases. And they asked me to step in as executive director. I told them no. I told them I didn't feel like I was qualified. I didn't know anything about infectious diseases. I didn't know how to fundraise. And they said, look, we'll give you support on the fundraising side. We'll get someone to coach and mentor you and work with you. And we've got the infectious disease side covered. We have some of the leading people in academic medicine. You don't need to know that. Learn enough to be, coherent when you're speaking about it, but what we need is someone who can lead and manage. And so I think it's just important to, look at those opportunities, believe in yourself enough, and ask for help.
Yeah, that's really, I think, very solid advice for our students is that you can't be afraid to lead. And I think we, especially young women, tend to think they're not qualified for an opportunity that might be presented to them. And that's the bold part. You've got to be bold and you've got to be willing to trust yourself and trust what others are seeing in you, that they're asking you to do this.
Exactly. And I'll follow up on that just for a moment for the students here to share. After my Peace Corps service in Romania, I stayed for a year and worked for GE Capital. They had purchased a bank in Budapest, and I was at their subsidiary in Romania. And there was a big presentation. And after the presentation, someone who I knew from the Peace Corps, who was working for a consulting firm, she pulled me aside and she said, Carol, you know more than what you put forward in that presentation. She said, own your seat at the table, speak up. And that's the other side of the equation, is to really give yourself that space, let your voice be heard.
Another angle on this from the perspective of students who may be listening in is that nowadays in higher education, there's a lot of focus on how we do career readiness for students, how they will finish their undergraduate degree and be ready, career ready. So how do we emphasize and recruit for Peace Corps involvement in terms of in that career ready mindset, even though I think once a Peace Corps volunteer gets into their assignment, maybe their whole rationale and their understanding of it might change, but to get them over the hump of actually applying and be willing to try it, how do we portray it in a career readiness sense?
I love that question. I've actually written about this because we think that employers are looking for all of the tech skills and big data and AI, and that is true. Those are some of the fastest growing skill sets. But what they are looking for in the context of a rapidly changing world is a growth mindset, agility, resilience, creative problem solving, effective communication, all of these soft skills that help us adapt. And that is something that is critical. And those are things that you learn in spades in the Peace Corps. So I wrote an op-ed with the head of LinkedIn social impact team, Meg Garlinghouse. She is also a returned Peace Corps volunteer. And they had just put out a report on this. And we said, it's really the best training for the world of work, over the coming decades, because that pace of change is not going to slow down. So being able to be adaptable, to look at limited resources, creative problem solving, to be able to fail and pick yourself up, dust yourself off and move on. Mm-hmm. Those are the skill sets that will make us successful in any, in any job, right? And they also really create a sense of purpose and meaning. So not outside of the job, what are those things that are going to lead to your wellness, right? And your sense of happiness and purpose as you move forward.
Do you think that now, after 65 years of the Peace Corps, that employers, potential employers of returned Peace Corps volunteers are going to understand what it meant, how much a student might have learned and grown as a Peace Corps volunteer? Or do students need to kind of take it into their own hands to talk about the skills they learned, the soft skills they learned, or is that a given?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think those who are familiar with it really seek out those skills. And when they see someone who has served in the Peace Corps, they know what that person has been through at some level, or at least it's just interesting enough to say, hey, I'm going to give this person, a second look, all other things being equal. And it gives you a lot to talk about in that, in that interview. I think it gets you past some of those initial screens. I have had a high-tech recruiter tell me that he looks for Peace Corps volunteers when he's hiring, which was fascinating to me. I said, why? That doesn't really make sense. Volunteers are serving in rural communities and are several years behind often in terms of technology. And he's the one who said, no, in high tech, you have to be innovative. You have to fail fast. You need to see what's happening, adjust quickly, and move on. And that was the skill set that he was looking for as opposed to a specific technical skill.
That's very interesting, and that makes so much sense. And I think it probably does lend itself even more when someone in the company who's involved in hiring either has been a Peace Corps volunteer or knows someone very close who has and can understand what that means.
Yes.
As we think about other ways that we're going to convince not only students and community members to participate in the Peace Corps, to become Peace Corps volunteers, we also, as you know, constantly have to articulate to the powers that be, especially funding powers, what is the value? Why should we do this? So we often measure success in quantitative metrics, number of participants who have gone, how many countries, dollars, things like that. Are there better ways to measure the impact of the Peace Corps, to tell the story of Peace Corps impact in order to convince people?
That is also a great question. And it's one that we struggle with constantly. So we can tell you how many young women we've reached, with women's empowerment camps and skills, how many students we've taught, all of those things. But I think that doesn't capture the change in mindset, both on the part of the volunteer and on the students they engage with. That sense of hope, of possibility, of progress, that really is that spark that volunteers bring. And it doesn't capture that long-term friendship and goodwill that is established over decades. And those are things that I saw more in an anecdotal space, but consistently enough that, it points to a pattern. Anything from a foreign minister sitting across the table from a State Department employee who served in the Peace Corps, and them having that connection of that minister being taught by a volunteer earlier in his life. Mm-hmm. And that happened again and again, a president, a vice president, a minister, and about 10% of State Department Foreign Service officers were formerly Peace Corps volunteers, and about 25% of USAID were also. Those are very, very rough numbers based on, some analysis we did. And, that ongoing contribution to the United States and how people approach their work, also very, very difficult to capture. So big picture, the Peace Corps is about goodwill. And, that is something that is nearly impossible to measure or to assess any causation, correlation perhaps. And several studies have tried to correlate the favorability rating of the people of a given country with the number of Peace Corps volunteers who were there.
Mhm.
Again, those are not the most robust, metrics, but we have to be able to tell that story. And I think the challenge with a lot of the way development or even nonprofits are structured is, you look for that short-term impact. And you know, funding cycles are structured around that short-term impact as opposed to those longer-term measures of goodwill.
Mhm. It's challenging. We find the same kind of challenge in many areas of international affairs and global engagement at the university level, that the real change and impact is often sparked at a personal level that can have ripple effects that are just very hard to quantify. And like I said, to say this caused this, but we know that they're related. And so but we never can stop trying to show the impact because some people need to be convinced over and over, and we will do that. Since so many of the people here are either students or faculty staff at a higher education institution, what recommendations would you have for institutions of higher education, for colleges and universities to support this bold invitation?
Well, I think that the opportunity to serve in the Peace Corps has gotten lost, in a very noisy environment.
Yes.
And, I think that really highlighting that opportunity and elevating the status of service is really very important. And that transformational impact and really helping students understand, sort of what that opportunity is. I've had many people come to me and say how sorry they were that the Peace Corps, was shut down because there was an assumption that along with USAID that the Peace Corps didn't exist either. And, awareness that we are still out there doing this good work is really, really important. And, that lost some steam during COVID, because our best ambassadors are currently serving volunteers, the ones who are sharing their stories with friends and family, returned volunteers who are going to speak at classrooms. So it's that personal engagement and the support to say to someone, so not just at a general level, but to say to someone, hey, I think you would be really good in this role
Yep.
and you can do it.
Another question from an attendee, and this I don't think I know the answer to, but I might, which is, does the Peace Corps currently partner with any US-based nonprofit organizations to support domestic service opportunities in rural North America?
So that's a great question. The Peace Corps mandate does not allow the Peace Corps to work domestically. So we've only done it twice, and it can be done at the invitation of another agency. So the first time was during Hurricane Katrina, and the second was during COVID, when we were asked by FEMA to support, COVID vaccination efforts across the United States. That was wonderful and really a great partnership. But doing anything like that is in the US is really outside the scope of the legal authorities that the agency has.
Okay, and that during COVID was using your volunteers you had evacuated from around the
Mhm.
world. It was able to still put them to good use and to work. That's
Yes.
cool. It's
And I
wonderful.
can tell you, Kathleen, what was amazing to me is, I was living in Montgomery County, Maryland at the time. There were volunteers who were serving in 8 states, some of them, in my own backyard. And their language skills in Swahili, Amharic, all of these different languages really came into play in
Mhm.
diverse communities around the United States, really building trust and meeting people where they were, about getting vaccinations. And in, I believe it was Oregon, some of them went to, a community of unhoused people, and they didn't want to go to the vaccination site. What do Peace Corps volunteers do? They went to the vaccination site and brought the brought the healthcare workers, to the people. It's that kind of scrappy problem solving, that really punctuates what we can do.
So expanding a little bit on the COVID-19 pandemic, from your role as director of the Peace Corps and looking back on it, what was it like to lead an agency like this with the massive changes that happened during COVID, and what lessons would you learn or might you share in terms of managing this kind of total disruption in operations?
Well, I'm teaching a whole class on that at the moment, so I'll try to condense it into the next, few minutes. Look, I think when there is something that is existential at that level, you have to adapt quickly. You have to establish your relevance, your ongoing relevance, and you have to seize the moment, to do whatever you can, to really lead the agency forward. So we made sure that every unit was very clear on how they were going to use this time. We ended up over a period of 2 years not having any volunteers. It took us 2 years to get volunteers back. I took the reins over about 9 months into that journey, and that is when we started with the domestic deployment. We had our staff around the world doing the work of volunteers and supporting COVID response and recovery on the ground. We had our back office teams, making sure that system implementations that had longer, implementation plans, we shortened those cycles so that we were ready to go when volunteers were back, whether it was an IT security system or a grant reporting system. And then we launched a virtual service pilot. And this started before I stepped in, but this was at the request of the government of Botswana, where they said, we need help with social media. We need help with our messaging to support, healthy behaviors during COVID. And we stood up a virtual service pilot, which is ongoing to this day, that helped us to stay active in Ukraine during a period of war. So we had virtual service participants supporting teachers in trauma-informed teaching techniques virtually from a bomb shelter in Ukraine. You have to, see what is happening in that moment and really respond and adapt. So when those volunteers finally were back, which there were many, many false starts along the way, and a lot of details to work through, we were able to go back into communities in a way that really respected and honored their health and safety as well as the volunteers' health and safety.
That it's such a major upheaval. And I think that you're right. The way that you approach it with the mindset of it's existential, but there is a way to move beyond this and a way to pivot and take what the reality is and channel it into what the mission is. And ultimately, that's what you were able to do, even though I'm sure it was lots of fits and starts. Like you said, it took 2 years to get volunteers back into the field, but you're there. One of the questions one of the participants asked is, are you aware of any similar programs that other countries do? They mentioned something that Germany might do, that in terms of kind of development and people to people in other countries, because we often say that the people to people efforts are a part of our soft diplomacy of the United States. So are other countries seeing this as well?
They are. And what's really exciting to see is how some of those countries have modeled themselves, in a way that is similar to the Peace Corps. One of those is KOICA, the Korean Development Agency, and JICA, which is the Japanese agency. And those are the ones, when I was a country director in Malawi, that we saw most frequently at the community level in a way that was similar to the way the Peace Corps operated. So some of our volunteers would work with JICA and COICA volunteers, and that was terrific. The other one that I'm really excited about, I actually sit on the board of an organization called Core Africa. So this organization was founded by a returned Peace Corps volunteer, Liz Fanning, who served in Morocco and was asked by a Moroccan if she could serve in the Peace Corps. I was asked that question multiple times in Malawi, and just said, no, I'm sorry, it's only for US citizens. Liz took that as a call to action and started an organization for Africans who want to, college educated Africans, to serve in their own country, but in a rural community that's different from where they grew up. They learned human-centered design. They serve for a year. And then once they've served in their own country for a year, they're eligible to go and serve in another African country. And they are celebrating their 15th birthday. For many years, they were operating in 3 countries. Malawi was one of them, and Peace Corps in every country where there's overlap has helped them get started and shared resources and such. And now they are in 11 countries. And for this fiscal year, they got 25,000 applications for 650 slots across these countries. Like truly amazing demand. The median age in Africa is 19. There is a tremendous youth bulge. There are so many amazing young people who, really are looking for opportunities to serve their own country. And what's exciting to me about that is that, this is an important shift, right? And it doesn't negate the need for or the opportunity for Peace Corps.
Right.
We had Peace Corps volunteers serving side by side with Core Africa volunteers. That's beautiful because it's about that people-to-people exchange. And, that's how we're going to move forward. So some really important developments.
And there's not a sense of rivalry or competition or sharing its secrets or, keeping secrets close to the vest. It's an open and collaborative relationship wherever it does happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have similar language and cross-cultural facilitators. We share, across where there are those needs, and many of our staff, we cross-participate in trainings. We have volunteers have conducted camps together. It's really quite impressive.
That's amazing. And I didn't know that was happening either. So thank you for sharing that. Another attendee writes that they are someone former from the U.S. development sector, former, and says there's a large group of returning both Foreign Service officers and many who have worked at either USAID or worked in communities in many different countries, including many returned Peace Corps volunteers, and they're finding it difficult to convince Colorado employers of the relevance of their background to the work of the employer. And we touched on this in terms of what a student might say. And of course, that's focused more on really entry level. But what about these professionals that might be coming back mid-career and are having to explain and make a case for why what they bring to the job is important?
I have heard this and have many, many friends who have experienced this. And it's really quite shocking to me.
Mm-hmm.
That experience and the relevance of it is so difficult to translate. I wish I had a magic wand or a magic phrase or a bullet to really be able to bring that to life. And I think, the one thing I would say is, to the extent that, you can speak in the language that people understand, sort of go back to those skills, that we learned about meeting people where they are, I think is important. And just keep plugging away. You will find the right place, for you. And this is a difficult moment across all of federal government, across a lot of state and local governments as well. So, I applaud everything that you've done and celebrate your successes and those skills, and they will find a home.
Mhm. Let's hope so. Another question, I know that you're not in the administration of the Peace Corps, so you're on the outside, but obviously you have a good window into it and probably still have a lot of connections there. So with the new kind of charge and the focus on AI and tech, do you know if what is the vision to incorporate that just in every single spot, even where there really isn't a lot of AI and tech available in certain rural communities? Is that going to override traditional areas of development work that Peace Corps has done? Is this going to become an overriding mission or something else that we might do in selected locations? What's your thought on that?
Well, I don't have an inside track on that, and the news is still quite fresh. It just came out a couple
Mhm.
weeks ago.
Yep.
Um, and what I found interesting is that it came out with some separate branding. And so I don't know if that indicates that it would, be an intensive, you know, add-on in partnership with the private sector and others,
Right.
and how that would be, incorporated into some of the existing programs. I would be surprised if it was a complete override,
Okay.
just based on what I'm seeing. I suspect that it will be more of a, standalone, not standalone, incorporated, but supplemental.
Supplemental. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, which would hopefully make a lot of sense. It can be another tool in the Peace Corps toolbox that's used appropriately when a situation calls for it. So, um, one of the things I think that we could all learn from Peace Corps, and maybe you could enlighten us a little, is lessons you might have learned about safety, inclusion, equity, and how you recruit and train volunteers. And so when we think about it in terms of higher ed, of safety, inclusion, and equity, and how we get students to even come to the university, we have to keep those factors in mind. And I think that the Peace Corps has done just an excellent job of weaving all those together. So any tips for those of us who are trying to cultivate cohorts, how you do that in today's world, especially, and keeping an eye out for safety and community and equity?
Mm. Those are all very different and interconnected topics.
Mhm.
And, when we talk about safety, there's sort of that perception of safety and that perception of belonging. And that goes along with the inclusion and the equity. And I think a university setting is definitely more challenging. When we bring volunteers into the Peace Corps, they come in as a cohort, and they have 2 to 3 months of training in a village, together as a cohort, and those cohorts are small. So I think the lesson that could be learned is, how do you form those cohorts in that community, in a setting that might not naturally lend itself to
Right.
that. And during that time, there is very intentional training on some of those soft skills. We called it intercultural diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, really looking at how we bridge sort of that self other bridge. And, how do we reinforce that learning and those competencies over time? We do a lot on active listening, because volunteers are trained to go into a community and listen first. So a lot of those soft skills are very intentionally taught. There is a volunteer competency model. They are assessed on those skills over time.
Okay.
So I would love to see, something like that at a university level, where you set the tone of how we engage and how we build community and how we, think about that sense of belonging, from the very beginning in a very tangible way.
Okay. Yeah, that's definitely food for thought. It is harder in a university setting, but we still have cohorts and there are ways to form community. And I think your point about intentional training to achieve different outcomes is excellent. That everyone who's trying to cultivate a cohort for positive end can look to do that.
Yes.
So what about the fact that in today's kind of polarized world, we find there is less and less trust of institutions, particularly of government institutions, and some might say of American institutions abroad. How does Peace Corps retain its trust with local communities, and how does it project the best of America so we can continue with the people to people diplomacy in this era of a kind of a deficit of trust?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that trust is earned and it's earned over time. So in communities around the world, that trust has been cultivated in many instances for decades. And I
65
think,
years sometimes,
yeah,
right?
and I think that is what, enabled us to evacuate so efficiently and effectively because the communities rallied around us. It's one of the ways we, account for the safety of our volunteers is really about their integration, in that community, the humility with which they come in, learning the local language matters a lot for that trust. So I worry less about trust at the community level around the world and more about how, Americans think about, the institutions and, how that might impact their willingness to serve. And I think that you really do that by delivering and engaging with those who are currently serving or have recently served to tell their story about what it actually means to serve.
We only have a couple of minutes left. I wonder if you have any closing thoughts, especially for student participants, in terms of why Peace Corps? Why now? Why does it matter?
Mm. Look, I think one of the most important things we can do right now is to engage across difference, whether that is here in America or across borders with the Peace Corps. And what the Peace Corps does is really leans into the fact that world peace and friendship is built one relationship at a time. And so many of the problems that we think about today feel so big. And if you can take that one step, whether it is the big step to go into the Peace Corps and really immerse yourself in it, or the step of, putting your phone down and connecting with someone you might not otherwise connect with as an everyday habit, those are the kinds of things we have to think very tangibly about. I think the crisis of polarization is linked to a crisis of loneliness and isolation. And we've got work to do to change those norms here in the US and, changing them by engaging across difference in the Peace Corps is a big, bold move. And I hope more people do it. And for those who can't, I hope that you take that small step in terms of your everyday connections.
Thank you. Thank you for those words. And thank you to all of our participants for joining us today. It's been a wonderful time chatting with Carol Spahn, former director of the Peace Corps and CSU executive in residence. And thank you so much, Carol, for your words today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. Take care.
All right.
Okay.